Hi, this is Andrew. Thanks for joining me. This video covers the installation of Virtual Box and Ubuntu. In class, we'll primarily use AWS for our learning, but if you're not in one of the client operating system classes, or if you just want to have another test environment to learn in, we can install VirtualBox, we can install Ubuntu, and have that available as something that you can experiment with, work with, and learn how to use Linux. I won't be installing Windows. You can actually install Windows in VirtualBox if you have a license or if you can get a temporary license for it. You can create your entire practice environment here. I'm going to start with VirtualBox. I'm installing it on Windows 10. On Windows, you can use VMware, you can use a number of other virtualization solutions, so whatever your preference is. If you don't have any, VirtualBox is free and relatively easy to use. So if you are on a Mac, you will have more limited options. You can use VirtualBox on an Intel-based Mac. On an M1-based Mac, which uses an ARM processor, you can't use VirtualBox. You'll have to use something like Parallels, and then you'll need different versions of the operating system. Kind of goes beyond what we're looking at right now. So that's why I have my Windows system running right now. I'm going to start by clicking on the link, and I just did a search for VirtualBox. I could go to virtualbox.org. From the results here, I could go to downloads, but I'll just go VirtualBox. I select download, and I select Windows hosts. And now it will offer me the option of saving depending on the browser you're using. I previously downloaded it, so now I have a second download of it, and I'm going to get started with the installation. Okay, so the installation is started. Welcome to Oracle VM VirtualBox 6126 Setup Wizard. In this case, that's the version that I just downloaded today. You see it right here. So I'm going to select Next, and Next, and Next. Now, when this happens, it might reset my VirtualBox or my connection to this system. I'm actually using remote desktop to access this Windows system, but I'll go ahead and do the installation. If it does blip off, it should happen quickly. It prompts me user account control. And this is a pretty quick installation, pretty straightforward. Now, just for the record, I had this installed earlier on this system. I deleted it or uninstalled it so I could reinstall it and capture it on video. Some of the things you might see might be a tiny bit different, but my expectation is it should be relatively similar. And while this takes several minutes, we'll just step away and let it finish. And okay, now it's finished and we have VirtualBox installed. I'm going to go ahead and launch it. Didn't even lose my connection to my remote desktop. Let me try to move this down a little bit. Yeah, I had an old version of the extension pack. I guess that I didn't remove that. So I'll download the latest and install the latest. If it asks you for that, go ahead and do that. Oh, I need to scroll to the bottom to agree. And there's another user account control, so I select that. Go ahead and delete everything there. So now I am ready to actually use VirtualBox. That's all it did. Now, virtualization software will just allow me to pretend that I have a computer that I can install another operating system on. And I could have multiple operating systems. The biggest constraint is going to be memory usage, hard drive space. So this is an older computer. It has an SSD drive. It has 16 gig of RAM. It is reasonably well equipped. The processor is fairly old, but it can still run virtualization software, limited to potentially 2 systems. Maybe if I optimize everything, I could get 3 systems running, especially if they were on the SSD and not on the secondary spinning drive. So first thing I want to do before creating the new virtual machine is I actually want to download Ubuntu. And just like VirtualBox, I did a search on Ubuntu. The first link right here is Enterprise Open Source and Linux, Ubuntu, the ubuntu.com website. I prefer to search just to make sure I'm going to the correct one. You could also go directly to download, but I'm going to go to this link here. And then if I go to download, it gives me options. I can do the server, I can do the long-term support version of Ubuntu or the latest version. And this is about 2.5 gigs, so I downloaded it earlier. I clicked on this link, and if I go here, we see I have the Ubuntu 2104 desktop AMD 64.iso. .iso is basically a file that represents everything that would be on a CD or DVD-ROM. That used to be the most common way for installing an operating system. You burn it to a CD or DVD, you put it in the drive on a computer, and then you do the installation. Frequently now we'll use a USB drive, but it's still an ISO file. And even if you use a DVD drive, even if you use a USB drive, it'll start from the ISO and build it off of that. So I have that file already there, again, about 2.5 gigs, so it'll take a little bit of time. And I'm going to create a new operating system. And I will want to put it someplace else, but I'll leave it there for now. This is going to be, well, I'm going to call it Ubuntu. And you notice, before I did anything, it was saying it was Windows 7, or it was guessing. Once I gave it a name, it starts to guess what it is. I could call this Penguin. Maybe it wouldn't know that it's Ubuntu Linux. But in this case, just by giving it the Ubuntu name, it guessed it was Linux. If it was not, I could say, no, it actually is Windows, or it is a different version. It's a 32-bit version. I can change all of this. This is just kind of VirtualBox's best guess at how it should configure things. Now, I'm going to go through and manually configure a lot of this stuff. First thing I want to do is, I have 16 gig, so I want to give this a lot more than 1024 megabytes, which is 1 gig. I'm going to give it 4096, which is 4 gigabytes. That's the RAM that this virtual machine can use. I'll create the virtual machine, and then the one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on the C drive, and I'm going to put it in C /VirtualBox VMs. I could put it any place I want to. I know I have enough space there. It should create the directory for Ubuntu under that and VirtualBox VMs, and it's going to create a virtual hard disk. Just like we have a physical hard disk inside of a computer, we have a virtual hard disk, and this is a file that represents the hard disk. I'll leave it as the default. It's 10 gig. It's going to dynamically allocate. So as it needs more space, it'll grow to that 10 gig. 10 gig is going to be the limit. I don't really need to worry about it going beyond that, because this is a test system. If I needed a system with 100 gig, I could make this a larger file. If I need absolute maximum performance, I can do fixed size so that it creates the entire disk all at once and it doesn't have to dynamically allocate. Again, really unnecessary in this situation. And there are different hard disk types that you can do for virtual hard disks. I'm doing the default VirtualBox disk image. So I will create that, and it's done. It has created basically a computer that I can install Ubuntu on. Now, if I go into settings, I can see some of those settings that I did. So if I look at, I'm making changes there, so I will allow it. If I go in, basic is just what it is and what it's doing. So advanced shows where it stores snapshots. We can talk about that in a minute. Whether I can drag and drop or have a clipboard shared between Windows and this Ubuntu system. Description, whether I want to do disk encryption. Now, system, this gets into what the computer actually is and what I can do with it. This is a fake computer. According to Ubuntu, it thinks it's installed on our computer. According to this Windows system, it's basically a bunch of files that are running a process. So this is the 4096 I defined earlier. If I want to change that, I can. The processors, it is set with a single processor, even though this is a multi-core system. I'm going to give it 4 processors to use. I'm going to say it can use as much processor as it needs. I can do different types of settings in here. If you know what they're for, consider them. If you don't know what they're for, then obviously don't worry about them. Storage. Now, I created this hard drive here. This is the hard drive, up to 10 gig. It is only 2 megabytes right now because it doesn't have anything installed on it. According to the operating system, it's going to see that this is installed on a SATA hard drive. Now, the other thing is, remember we had that ISO file. This is actually a CD-ROM drive, and it is not connected to anything. What I do now is I'm going to click on this circle right here. This says choose a virtual optical disk or a physical drive. I can just, so if I had the disk burned, I could put that into my Windows computer that's over there and say connect to this drive and use this disk that's in that drive. I have just a file, so I'm going to click on this and find that file. Select the disk, and I'm going to choose a disk file, and I actually moved it from my downloads directory into my VirtualBox VMs directory. So here we go. I'm going to select that, and now this ISO is attached to this CD-ROM DVD controller in the virtual machine. So when the virtual machine starts up, it's going to look at this and say, hey, this VirtualBox or this ISO file is the drive, the optical drive in the computer. Now, as I go through audio, no surprises there. Another big one that we're going to change a lot is network. And we don't have to worry about what these things are. We can leave it on NAT right now. But the other options are bridged, internal, host only. These are going to be really important to define the network that it's on and how it works. With NAT, this computer, that's network address translation, this Ubuntu computer will be able to get out to the internet. If I wanted to change it so my Windows computer could access this Ubuntu system, I would need to select something else. And I could go with bridged or host only. Each one does a different thing, and we'll talk about that at a later date. So I don't have to worry about serial. If I wanted to pass through USB or enable USB, I can do shared folders, but that's everything I need right now. So I now have an Ubuntu system. It's powered off. Here is everything that was configured in there. We have an optical drive. We have a fake physical hard drive. We have audio. We have our network here. We can see how it's configured. So the next thing I'm going to do is power it on. All I do is I have this highlighted. I can right click on it and start, and I can do a normal start, or I can click on this green button to start. So once I click start, it actually launches a window where this is basically a monitor on the virtual machine, and I can see what's happening here. Since it is on the since there's nothing on the hard drive, the file that we created, we now have it's launching from the DVD drive. Now the DVD drive, you see it's counting down. It wants to just launch Ubuntu. So that's what we're going to let it do. I could have hit enter to speed that along, and hopefully we will get into Ubuntu shortly. And it will give us 2 options. It will give us the option to install or to run it in live mode. Live mode doesn't change anything. It's really designed so that you could take that CD, burn it, drop it into a computer that you're using, test it out, and see what happens. It doesn't change, it doesn't install anything on the hard drive, it doesn't make any changes to the hard drive. The installation mode will actually change the hard drive. But it's not the hard drive of this Windows system that is changing. It's that file that we created that is the virtual hard drive that is going to change, it's going to update, and it's going to install everything there. So as this installation or as this startup continues, it should give us those options. Now this is, like I said, a fairly old computer. Definitely could use a reinstallation of Windows. So there's a lot going on it that I've tried to scale back as much as I could. but it's not running. It's not running great. You might have a system that's running much more effectively. But you can see it's accessing the CD right now. That's what that flashing is. It has a hard drive there. It shows that the cable is connected to the adapter, to the network translation adapter. And this pretends it's a real physical computer. We can disconnect that cable if we wanted, and the computer would react as if that cable were disconnected. We can go here and we can say, let's see, we can send signals to it. We can do some basic configuration here. Some things we can't do while it's running. I can also go over here, and if I say I want to pause this virtual machine, I want to close, I can save where it is, or I can even power it off. So all of these things can happen while I'm using this computer, just like any other computer. Now it is getting closer, but it's still spinning. And now it's at the install window. So let's see what our options. Obviously we can try it out. Doesn't make any changes to the computer. Now, if we install, this is where it's going to say things, and you really have to understand what it's saying and what it's doing, because if you don't understand, you might be afraid it's going to make a change that you don't expect, or if you have it set up in a different way, theoretically, you could damage or destroy your installation on the computer you're working with. So I have an English keyboard. I will continue. And I can do a normal installation, or I can do a minimal installation. I'll do a normal installation. Download updates, that will make the installation take longer. I'm going to skip past the installation in the video, so I'll leave this turned on. And I could install some third-party software for graphics and other hardware. I don't need to do that, but if this were a system I were using in like a fairly new laptop or even an older laptop, maybe I'd want to have that. Or if I had higher end system or expectations, I might want graphics drivers that were optimized a little better. I don't need to worry about that. So I will continue. Okay, and that took 30-45 seconds. And a lot of this, again, is because it's an older computer that I have for Windows. It's probably about 8 years old, so some things on it are slower than I would like. Now, this is the scary part. This computer currently has no detected operating systems. Remember, this computer is referring to that hard drive that we created that is contained within a file. So that file was brand new. That's why there's no operating system. Erase and install Ubuntu is fine because we're only looking at that file. If for some reason you burned that image to a DVD, that ISO file, and put it in your computer, and then the next day you went to use your virtual machine, you start up your computer, and it gave you this message, that would actually be potentially erasing your installation on your computer, your Windows installation on your computer. So just making sure that you are within VirtualBox, you're within this virtual machine, you know what you're doing, you know what you're deleting, everything else. We can go in here and do advanced features. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to click install now, and I'm guessing it's going to take quite a while, so we'll come back once it's complete. Okay, so it didn't quite complete. It prompted me to continue on the hard disk settings. It prompted me for location so it can set a time zone. Now it's going to prompt me for some account information. So I'll call this Andrew, and I will call this Prof A, and we have a username, and I'll put a password, and I'll put a simple password, and it's going to say that's a bad password. In this case, the only people who can get to the, or the only person who can get to this virtual machine is someone who has access to my computer. I'm not going to worry about it. I'll just leave the simple password, which in this case is password. Obviously, it's mad about that, but again, I'm not worried. So one more continue, and now it's going to start copying files. So we'll be back. So about 10 minutes later, we get to the screen that says installation is complete. Restart your computer in order to use the new installation. And again, we're restarting the virtual machine, not the actual computer. So I select restart now, and this window here, which is our monitor into the virtual machine, restarts. And as it's starting, we can see also down here, this is the disk and it's grayed out because it's not installed. We can see the hard disk being accessed. If you're used to that on a regular computer, that's the light flashing on the computer. And it will, again, take a minute. It'll take a little bit longer to start up the first time. So we'll skip forward to that point. And about 30 seconds later, we have our login window. So I just select my account that I created. It prompts me for the password. And I type in my password. And I'm going to be able to get into my Ubuntu system. If this is a system I'm going to use regularly, there are tools that I can install from Virtual Box to make the system work better. Sometimes it'll actually install those tools automatically, but I can go in once it starts up and start playing with Ubuntu. In future classes, we're going to really focus on using command line, and really that's 99% of what we'll be doing. But your first time in, here's a new operating system. If you haven't used Ubuntu before, play around, look at it, see what you can do. I don't want to connect any online accounts, so I will skip that. I don't need to send information because it's a test system. I don't need location, and we're ready to go. This is software that I could install if I wanted to. Again, this is not my primary operating system. This is an operating system to play with and experiment with. You notice we have Firefox, we have a mail program, we have our files. One of the big things we're going to do a lot of is use a terminal. So now we have our terminal running, and it is Andrew, and the computer name is Prof A. Could have called it anything we want. Don't worry about this. We will get to this a lot more later on. But here's now a Linux test environment we can use. I can get to the internet. I can do updates. I can install things. I don't need to worry about running the latest update. I'm going to do remind me later on that. If this is something you keep running for a long time, maybe you want to go through that installation. So now we have Ubuntu running on VirtualBox on a computer. This lets us do a lot of different things. Like I said, in our operating systems class, we're going to use AWS primarily, and most of the time we'll be using a terminal. But if you want to have an additional place to test out, or if you're not in that class and you want to be able to start playing with Linux, here's a good way to get started. And it's probably a good idea to go in and say, you know what if I wanted to create a file? Let's go into my desktop directory, folder is empty. I'm going to create a folder and call it storing stuff. And if I now minimize this folder structure, there's my storing stuff folder. Now, if I wanted to create a text file, I can go here and I have LibreOffice, which is a lot like Word, or just a plain text editor. So I'm going to open up a text editor and say, hello world, and let's see if I can figure out how to, save right here. I'll put it in desktop, storing stuff, and I'm going to give it a name, first file. It's saved, and I'll get this out of the way, and now I have that first file stored in that storing stuff directory. So play around with it. Make sure you can do some basic things. The more things you try to do, especially if you run into problems, you say, I can't make it play music. Well, let me figure out how to do that. The more things you test out, the more problems you run into, the more things you can fix. And that's really useful. If you wanted to use this as your only operating system, you have to be really careful with your computer to wipe it out in the right way. But from a virtual machine, you can do a lot, and you can also then start learning command line, which is really the important part of Linux. So that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching.